Hi, I'm Ben Smith. And Friday last, I had a vision. And for the first time in my life, I was being told that it needed to be made public. Well, I was in no shape mentally to go through it again. And so it was left up to my wife, Sharon, which she did, and it's on her site, Sharon Cluck. The name of it is Prophetic Apocalyptic Dream. And I would suggest if you could go there first and see that, you're going to have a much better idea when you come to chapter 2 what we're talking about. Because this does dovetail right in to the first one. I had told Sharon, it kept nagging at me that it just wasn't complete. And I told her a couple, 3 times. The last time I did, when I went to bed, it was early morning. I was, all of a sudden into the middle of a dream. And I was in a cloud of millions of vultures. And I was being tossed around and jostled and knocked around. And it truly was like being in a tornado, or what I would imagine one to be. But the vultures had no interest in me, none. But it was like a stampede for sure. And so I woke up, and it was 7:48 a.m. And for the rest of this, I was awake, and I was seeing it, and I was feeling it. It was being played out in front of me, and an experience. This is the first for me. I'm going to read parts of it so that I don't miss anything. So I knew that there was something missing, as I told you, but the Spirit now told me what it was. It was the saved people, or survivors, or maybe the remnant. I do not remember what they were called. But I said, "Where are they?" And I yelled it, and there was no answer. None. And I began to yell, "Where are they? Are there any? Were they raptured?" And again, no answer. So, and remember this, I was awake in real time, and I up and I touched my left cheek, and there was a single tear. In the flash, I did that. I was back in our tabernacle. Tabernacle is where most of the first part of this vision happened. And it was just like I'd always been there. And I heard the hum again. Only this time I was able to pick out letters and words where before I couldn't make anything out. Well, I turned around. Now I'm facing westward. And I saw Sharon. And she was praying so loud and praying in tongues and fast that you couldn't make out the words. They were all running together. And the other people that were there either had their heads bowed, and I can't tell you whether they were praying or not. But as I looked westward, I should have been able to see our home, but our home wasn't there. And I was seeing all the way to the road. And I could still, the road is our property line. And the other side of the road was just blurry and totally out of focus. Along the property line, you could still see the faint golden bolts rising up on the property line. And to my right, a shadow appeared and then began to take shape. Also to my right, but closer to me, a second image appeared. And then further down the slope, a third image came into view, but it was stooped so low that it almost looked like it was crawling. And several yards away, and now to my left, a fourth shape came into view, smaller than the first two that were standing. And as they came into focus, I gasped out loud. It was absolutely clear. They had been in one or more battles, and they had given their all. Everything that a human has to give, they did. And number one, I looked at him now, and his face was not even recognizable as a face. His head hung down, his shoulder was drooped, the left was more so than the right. The sweat and blood covered most of his body, from his head to just below his knees. His fingers were cut and broken. His arms hung limp at his sides, and his walk was barely a shuffle. And I could see, I couldn't hear him, but I could see that he was mumbling to number two. And number two was following a step or two behind number one's right, dragging even more than number one. Number two's left hand was just mangled. But somehow he held a stick and he used it to reach out and touch number one. And I looked at his bowed head and realized he had no eyes. They had gouged them out. He stumbled along, dragging his right leg, and his boots were just barely hanging on, just pieces of leather loose. Number three was bent over so much that I could see the wounds on the back of his head and his neck, and the bones were showing. The whipping had torn his flesh so deeply that he almost screamed with every step. And then I looked at his feet. And that's why he was crouching. They were mutilated. Just pieces of feet. One had a hole in it, and yet he was still attempting to walk. Number four, and the smallest of them all, I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. The tattered clothes were a rust red, just soaked in his blood. There wasn't a place on its body that hadn't been whipped. And the right arm was cradling something. And at first glance, this was why I thought it might be a woman. It looked like it was carrying an infant. And as I looked closer, I was completely shocked to see that he was cradling his guts to keep them from falling out and on the ground. He had been disemboweled. And I shouted, "Who are these people? Help me. Help them." And the Father answered me, "My real warriors, faith-filled warriors, not those expected." And then he thundered, who stood. An extreme realization smacked me, just enveloped me. These horrors and more were done to Jesus. And it will happen again before he returns, God continues. They will find and follow my light. Others will follow. And God called to them in a language and in a manner that I didn't understand. But I witnessed something truly phenomenal. All four raised their heads, livened up, and started moving toward God. They were trying to run. They truly knew the voice of their shepherd. And I was crying because I was awake for all of this. The crushing, desperate feeling was replaced. Just no memory of it, hardly. I knew I was feeling what they were feeling. And the euphoric knowing, they had a euphoric knowing that they were sharing with me that Christ fills everything to overflowing. And all this time that was being played out before my eyes, I was praying and thanking the Father that he will make a horrible condition into eternal life. I thought it was done. And then I feel his arm around my shoulders. And I'm sure he was guiding this. As I was replaying this, all that had happened, I was very troubled by the difference in the numbers of dead and dying and the very few warriors. And I know God said that others will follow, but it is very obvious. There were no surface Christians and no fence sitters present. Only the ones who would willingly volunteer to fight to the last breath for their God were saved. What else could it mean? Please comment or share. You can ask me questions that really, you have to remember they aren't my words. I simply was voicing it. If you have questions, I'll try to answer them, but you may have to go to a higher power.
Thank you.
I would love to hear from your comments. If you have more insight. And I hope this finds you blessed and doing well, and that this continues, you continue to be blessed.